ever known. Don't know where it goes, but it's home to me and I walk alone.
And welcome to the Two Solitudes podcast. This is the regular edition of the Two Solitudes podcast, not to be mixed up with any of our special editions, of which there's been a lot lately. Kevin, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm doing awesome. I've been really in good shape, feeling great, and doing a lot better than the U20s.
Yeah, that was a sad story. We don't want to talk about the U20s because less than a week ago we were hyping them up, and now we all look like fools. But we are going to need to break that down, and we're going to break that down in some detail today. But we did bring a guest on, Rudi Schuller from GOAL. He's going to talk about the U20s, the men's national team, and a little bit of Toronto. We're going to try and keep this somewhat not TFC focused today, although there is a bit of TFC news in here because we've been talking a lot about them lately. But we're going to bring Rudi on, talk about the U20s, and then we're going to come back and I'm going to share some of the things that I've been hearing today about what went wrong in Jamaica.
Absolutely, and we'll start by bringing Rudi on the line right now.
I walk this empty street on the boulevard of broken dreams, where the city sleeps and I'm the only one and I walk alone.
And welcome back to Two Solitudes. Rudi Schuller joins us on the line to talk about the good, the Giovinco signing, and the bad, the Canadian U20s. Maybe we'll touch on the men's national team as well. Rudi, thanks for joining us.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
Rudi, let's start briefly with the Giovinco signing. And I read your column today on GOAL, and we'll link that out after this for sure for others to read it as well. But just if you could just sort of tell the listeners what your general perception of what that signing means for Toronto FC and to MLS.
Well, to not put too fine a point on it, I think it's huge. Obviously this isn't the first go around for TFC signing big name players. Of course, we all know. I hate using the words bloody big deal, but that just never seems to die. With Jermaine Defoe coming here last year, and then that whole story coming, and of course Michael Bradley, Torsten Frings, going back even to Julian de Guzman. So TFC is no stranger to signing big name contracts and big name deals, but this is even bigger because this is an Italian international in his prime. This isn't a guy who's 34, 35 years old looking for one last paycheck. This is a guy who had real options in Europe. Of course, he wasn't starting at Juve because, that's Juventus. We're talking about Paul Pogba and Arturo Vidal and Carlos Tevez. Those kind of guys are in front of him. So it's not like he was, it's not like he was some kind of slacker or some kind of guy on the downside of his career that couldn't break into a team. Breaking into Juventus, you have to be in the top of the top. So I won't make any illusions that Giovinco is at the top of the top, but he's in that very next group where he really could have played just about anywhere in the world, but deciding to play for TFC of all teams, first of all, but in MLS, it's just quite incredible in 2015.
There is, if you look at what pushback there is out there, it usually revolves around that's so TFC trying to throw money at the problem to make it go away. They have to put a team around him. One player doesn't change things. Is it your perception, Rudi, that the management understands that and they're not trying to just make a big name signing to appease and they're actually trying to build around him? Do you think that they understand what they're doing?
I do get that. I do get that impression from the current management. Of course, we have to separate the current management from all the other management regimes that TFC's had, and there's been countless. I can't even remember them all, to be quite honest. But I do get that impression from them. It seems like they're not only looking at the big names, which is important. It's definitely important in this market, especially when you think about BMO Field is expanding by another 8,000 seats. They have to sell those seats. They have to justify the cost that they're pouring into that stadium. But they're not just looking at the top end. They're also looking at the bottom end. Nobody really talks about the fact that they also signed Jay Chapman to a homegrown contract last week. Of course, they had a bunch of draft picks. We'll see how those work out. But they're also filling at the bottom of the roster. So it seems, and this is just the early impression I get, and of course, hindsight is always 20/20. But it seems like this management regime seems to be looking at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture does include big signings. And this is not a small market, and TFC cannot afford to act like a small market team.
Going back to a subject we're more used to talk about in Canada, and that's broken dreams, bad results. Talk about the U20s and how all our hype and our excitement that a week ago were there are shattered this morning.
Oh, it's talk about going from one extreme to the other. I mean, it's funny how we're talking about TFC in a successful point of view. Now we're talking about Canada.
Who was the first draft? Who? Exactly.
Yeah, well, exactly. But yeah, I mean, call me one of consider me one of the people who was fooled by this team. I thought I went on Sirius XM last week and I said, if this team doesn't make it through, they're a failure, and I'm going to stand by that. They are a failure. I don't know if I can completely put it on the players because a lot of the players that should have been on the field weren't on the field. So I had to look at the coaching staff and some of the decisions to not play guys like Hanson Boakai in that game. To not start Marco Bustos, to not start Jordan Hamilton. How can you not start these guys who are key stars for your team in a game where you have to win to get through, or to even keep your hopes alive? And not even just talk about the one game, talking about the tournament as a whole. Yeah. It started off great, a win against Haiti, but there were some signs.
Yeah, sorry. This
sorry,
one game against Haiti.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just the one game against Haiti. I think it was the opposition that dictated the result and not the play of the team, actually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they got the 3 points, and but as I was about to say, there are some signs that they weren't playing to the potential. Then they lost 2-0 to Mexico, and in a game where it was a fair result. Mexico got a couple of scares from Canada, but they were the better team. And then from there, they just went off the cliff. This is a Canada team with the amount of talent they've got individually that should not be losing. Should not be losing to the likes of El Salvador, and especially Cuba. I mean, I'm not one to look down at other teams in CONCACAF because, hey, I'm a Canadian supporter. So, of course, I can't look down on any team in CONCACAF. But you can't be losing to teams like that of that caliber with the type of talent that is available to this roster. So, yeah, it's definitely a huge disappointment, and I think heads will roll soon.
You mentioned the coaching staff. Let's describe a little bit what was that team was lacking. If we're looking at the play of the team, there was no cohesion, and it seemed like players were left to themselves. Can you just explain to us how they seemed just disorganized?
Yeah, I mean, you put it best. They really did seem disorganized, which is very odd because, in the year leading up to that, they seemed like a very well-oiled unit kind of thing. Where all the parts kind of complemented each other, and it seemed to go out the window when the game started counting. Now, is that a classic case of the Canadian mentality where things get tough in soccer terms? The going get tough, the tough don't get going in this case. I don't know. I don't know if I can put that on these players because a lot of these players seem to have a lot of confidence in themselves. Whether it was overconfidence or not, that has to come down to the coaching staff getting the best out of their players. And if I were a betting man, I'd say that quite a few of these players are going to go on to have good careers. So this is a big wasted opportunity, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and of course that is the key. When you look at any under 20 group, any country in the world, the true measure is how many go on to be professional contributors, how many go on to be national team contributors, and certainly there is still promise there. If I can be the positive voice for a second, the one thing that I wondered about, and I look at that El Salvador winning goal, the sort of the way that they approached that free kick at the end. They didn't really try and slow the play down. They didn't do some of the stuff that we kind of look down our nose at here to try and protect what would have been a very important point at that point in time. Do you think that this is about being naive at a CONCACAF level, not understanding those CONCACAF factors that we so often slip on in CONCACAF? And if that's the case, Rudi, do you think there might be a positive in the failure here if they can learn from that?
Well, yeah, but I don't know if the Canadian public at large or the Canadian mentality allows for too much of that to go on. We are seeing some Canadian players get smarter at that, if I can use that term, but I don't see it coming to the point where where Canadian players are going to be rolling around and doing the stuff that we all despise, and that's my point, is that we all despise it as observers, and these players grew up in that environment that they come to despise it too. So it's not in their nature to do that. Whereas in other soccer cultures, that's part of winning. That's part of getting an edge on your opponent. I think you have to look at the only other country in CONCACAF that's really similar to us, of course, is the U.S. their culture doesn't allow that either. But of course, they have a much larger talent pool, and the only way to really defeat that is to be better than the other team. The diving and so on and so forth only works to a certain degree, because at the end of the day, the teams that dive and do that, they're only going to be backed up by their talent. That's why the Hondurases and Panamas of the world are still better than all the other teams in CONCACAF that still pull that stuff off. So at the end, I think talent and tactics and organization are gonna win out ultimately. So I don't know if we should be focusing too much on that stuff, but I do agree that there should be a little bit more credence allowed. A little bit more leeway allowed for that kind of stuff within Canadian soccer. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Probably not. Yeah. Look, you mentioned a little bit ago whether heads would roll in this situation. And I think one of the criticisms of the CSA of Canadian soccer is it's been a bit of an old boys network that protects its own in the past. And even though we've had massive failings in the past, they haven't necessarily instantly led to accountability. Do you think things have changed within the CSA to hold this group accountable? There really should have been more in this tournament. Will there be firings? Will there be changes?
Yeah, I think it's changed enough that there will be some accountability held. I do believe that there will be some firings. I don't think that, this isn't the old CSA where Canada goes into a U20 World Cup, has the worst showing ever, and then the coach gets hired to the senior national team. I don't think that this is the same CSA that'll do that. I think this CSA is a little less naive. Go back to that word again, a little less naive in that regard. And I don't think I hate advocating for people to lose their jobs, but and I do think that Rob Gale is quite a bright guy, and he knows his stuff, but maybe he was a little naive in some of his selections, and thinking that he could hold out guys like Hamilton and Bustos and Boakai against Cuba and hold him out for what was thought to be a more important game against Honduras later this week, which of course now is a meaningless game. So I think the naivete isn't quite what it was, but at this point nothing really shocks me about Canadian soccer. So if he stays on for another cycle, that wouldn't surprise me either.
One thing that comes to my mind is, do you think that the state of the U20 now, does it demonstrate where Canadian soccer is? And if it does it really show that Canada really needs to find an identity in their Canadian soccer to have a type of playing style that would go from the top of the pyramid to the bottom, and do we need to do that going forward?
That's a really tough question. How do you define a Canadian playing style, especially when we're so influenced by so many other nations around the world? You've got your English styles, your French styles, your Latino styles, all that kind of blending together into whatever we have here in Canada. And if you go from region to region, they play differently out in BC than we play here in Ontario versus how they play out in Quebec and that kind of thing. So it's, for a country this large and this disparate, it's going to be hard to really find a playing style that kind of suits everything from top to bottom. I think more likely what's going to happen is we're going to find coaches who are adept in multiple playing styles. And actually, I look at Benito Floro, who's very pragmatic in the way he's approaching the national team, and he's adapting the playing style to the players. And that's exactly what I think we need as a nation, is because we're just too spread out and too different across the regions, and that's not even getting into all the politics and the pettiness that goes on. But yeah, I think we're just too spread out to have one uniform playing style across age groups and programs. And I think each group of players presents their own challenges. And if you're looking at hiring coaches, you got to hire coaches that are able to be flexible and adapt to each set of players that they have.
Yeah, we'll talk about this. Kevin and I will talk about this in our next segment. There is talking to some people in the Canadian soccer world today, some concern about a lack of continuity between the senior national team and the youth teams, and maybe there needs to be something addressed there. But let's move on to end the interview, Rudi, and talk about the senior national team, their pair of games against Iceland. You don't want to read too much into those games. They were a ragtag lineup in both countries. But that said, what was your read on those games for the two games for Canada, a draw and a loss?
Overall, I'd look at them as a positive. It was a loss and a draw against a team that's technically ranked way, way, way higher, almost 100 spots higher in in the FIFA rankings. Of course, Iceland was missing most of their team as well because it wasn't played on FIFA dates. But if you take a look at it, you can kind of see what Benito Floro is trying to instill. He's trying to instill more of a possession game, but as I mentioned before, a little bit more of a pragmatic style of possession game where Canada looks to hit on the counter and set pieces rather than try to outpass or dazzle the opponent. Of course, I mean they really did outpass Iceland in both games and they outpossessed them, but they're not going to be able to do that against stronger teams and stronger lineups. So they're going to look to kind of strike when they can and play to Canada's strengths, which is of course set pieces and those types of things. So we saw a little bit of that against Iceland. As you mentioned, I don't think we can read too much into it. I think it was just helpful to get a run out for some of the fringe guys and some of the guys who were even below fringe guys. But for me, it was just positive to see Canada play a couple of games in January. That doesn't happen very often, and it speaks to Floro getting a new sense of maybe professionalism within the top level of Canadian soccer, in that they don't just go dormant for 6 months and then boom, there's World Cup qualifying. He's constantly looking at players and hoping to uncover maybe a diamond in the rough that can help out with when World Cup qualifying starts in June. So I think that's the positive you got to take from that. A player like Manrique James who looked a little bit like Daniil Henry out there, where he was brilliant 1 minute and a little bit reckless the next. He could turn out to be something, and I never really thought of that until I saw these games. So maybe he gets called up again. So it's those kind of things you're trying to get out of these early friendlies, and that's all we can really take out of it, I think.
Canada's own version of the Cupcake Camp in the States.
Yeah, exactly.
Rudi, we'll touch base again soon, but I think that we're going to see each other tomorrow for the USL Pro announcement, and in many ways, I don't know if you agree, it might be the most important thing that is happening in Canadian soccer right now is those U20 kids might have a chance to play somewhere next year in the 3 MLS cities that have the teams.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. I wrote about this when all 3 of those teams were announced. That in one fell swoop, we've effectively doubled the amount of professional soccer jobs available in this country, which, of course, is a low bar, but we got to start somewhere. I mean, when you talk about low bars, that's basically what Canadian soccer has been for the past 20, 30 years. So we got to start somewhere, and we got to find a way to get these promising young players that we saw on display at the U20s, maybe a little bit more hardening experiences in the professional game. Maybe if they had some of that, they would have been able to battle through some of the adversity in Jamaica that we saw in the U20s. So it's a long grind, but this is a massive step towards respectability for Canadian soccer, and I look forward to watching all 3 teams play next year.
Well, one last quick one. Did you think that kid D-Rose got a future?
Yeah, he's scoring in bunches, so. Who knows? Maybe he'll play till he's 50.
Maybe. Rudi Schuller from GOAL. We'll get that link out. Thanks, Rudi, for taking the time, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rudi. Thanks for listening to the Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast with Kevin Laramie and Dwayne Rollins. You can reach the guys on Twitter at 24th Minute and at Kevin Laramie, or both of them at Two Solitudes Pod. Reach the guys on email, twosolitudespodcast@gmail.com. But especially subscribe on Stitcher Radio. Now back to the show.
And welcome back to the Two Solitudes Podcast. Thanks again for Rudi. He did that on very short notice today, so we thank Rudi for that. Thought that it was a worthwhile conversation to have today in relation to the other day. We're going to talk about the men's national team at the end of this, but we need to break down the U20s, as painful as it is at this particular time. And we do have to be careful about understanding that we are talking about teenagers and that we are talking about the U20 level, which is generally perceived as not important and a win level in most of the developed soccer world. But here in Canada, where we need something to build on, that's why this is such a slap, that we thought these guys were ready to take a step forward. We thought these guys were representing the positive movements forward, and then for them to go out the way they did is certainly discouraging, to say the least.
No, it is. Just like you mentioned, it's the way that happened. With the first game, the victory against Haiti, like I was saying with Rudi, yes, it's a victory. It was 3-1 victory, but the opposition compared to the rest of the group they were in was not the same, and they couldn't get that momentum or just that confidence that he needed going forward. And against Mexico, yes, it was only a 2-0 loss, but it was still a loss, and he never got back up after that knockdown.
Yeah, certainly. And you're playing those mid-level sides, and certainly Cuba should even be considered mid-level. It's a little below that. It's concerning if you can't figure out how to beat them at this level. And I think that the heat and the CONCACAF and the pitch and the refereeing and all this, especially in the Cuba game, they were very frustrated in that Cuba game in that second half. You even saw it when we laughed at it when we were reading it. The Canadian Soccer Twitter feed was talking about players being mortally wounded on the ground and things like that. But that just sort of reflects kind of an attitude that you just need to suck it up and get over sometimes, because that's what CONCACAF is, and it's not changing anytime soon.
You're taking the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, yeah, it's been an excuse for decades now. It's time we move past that. It's time that we should actually get ready. How come we're not practicing into a sauna in the winter to make sure, there's things we could do. It's an extreme example I'm giving, but it's just to point out that we can figure that out. There's something we can do. There's something to get prepared for that. Yeah, the heat's different. The conditions are different. It's an hostile crowd, even though at that level the crowd is not that hostile, but still, we need to get past that excuse and do something about it.
Well, yeah, if you want to ever get ahead, you do. I mean, the U.S. has dealt with it for years. They generally win in those conditions now. They shut the crowd up and shut the refereeing up and all that sort of stuff the best way that you can, by putting the ball in the back of the net more than the opposition does, right? And look, you even look at countries like Panama and Honduras, and they've excelled above because their talent level is above us at this point too. So there's a lot more going on than just CONCACAFing. If you want to blame that, that's a nice excuse, but it's just not the case. Look, in the days, this is where I've reached out to several people in the last couple of days from all over the country that have been involved in this game, that know a lot about this program and have a lot to say about this program. And the consensus that I got was a couple things, Kevin. First off, I asked, were we overvaluing the talent? And some people say just plain yes, we were. Others are a little more diplomatic. I think the consensus was that the starting 11 for this group, the 95s, was solid, was amongst the best, and that we well produce several good pros there if they get an opportunity. And that is the key, and we have to reiterate that. If 3 or 4 of these guys go on to have a pro career, then this cycle is a victory regardless of whether they go to New Zealand or not, which they're not now. But what they then went on to say was that the depth below that starting 11 was really lacking, and that really was exposed when the couple kids got left back in Europe, and it was exposed as well by some of the decisions that were made by the coaching staff, and that's the other level to next. Look, it's not fixing talent is a problem, and what I'd say to that is that having 11 guys that are right up there, and having 3-4 guys that are probably going to have solid pro careers is a step up for this program, and it shows that the pathways that do exist right now are producing some players. We just need more of them, and we need to be more consistent and more diligent about finding other pathways that work as well. That is a big question with the technical directing staff of the CSA, whether they're limiting themselves and where they look for players. I talked about that in the fall when there was. I talked about Kyle Larin and how it wasn't a guarantee that he was going to be on this team because he wasn't from the MLS Academy angle, and he was ultimately in that team, as we know. But it speaks to something that I heard a couple times today, is that Fonseca, the technical director, Tony Fonseca, is a guy that has a very narrow view of what a professional pathway is, and for instance, it was said to me that he hasn't recognized what everyone else in the country has recognized, that Sigma Academy is the 4th most important development pathway right now going on. He just doesn't recognize them in the same level. And they said 4th or maybe better.
Look at the draft from last week. Just listen to the super show we did on our YouTube page, by the way. Two Solitudes podcast on YouTube. But we talked about how Sigma is changing how Canadians are being seen in the draft level now. It's basically because of Sigma, not because of the other pathways. They're best, like you were saying. They're the best. It's even better than the 4th one. And there's other academies like this one growing up with the success of Sigma right now. So I think it should be taken notice of the other pathways, because the other pathways are more successful.
Yeah, look, I think there is good work being done at the MLS Academy levels, as I've said many times on this. Um, is it a universal level? No, and the Sigma example is right there. And there were kids, I think, involved with the Sigma program that didn't get a look that probably should have. But that speaks to one half of it and a little bit of it, and certainly it's not the only thing going on now. Robin Gale's going to get most of the attention in this. And if there is a sacrifice being made, it's probably going to be him not getting renewed for the next cycle. And I think that that's something that any coach at this level should expect, that if they fail to qualify for an event, particularly when there was this much attention and this much resources given to them, then he probably should fall on his sword. But what I'm hearing throughout the community is that, most people kind of like him. They think that he has some good ideas, but that there's a lack of connection between what's happening at the U20 level and what's happening at the senior national team level. And they put the blame totally on Fonseca for that. They believe that the technical director position is where the problem lies right now, and that there's some real questions being asked about that in the soccer world in Canada right now, whether he should be the one that has the target on his back following this, whether we should be looking to make the men's program similar to the women's program, where John Herdman has ultimate control across the levels. They think that, and I've had this expressed to me by several people today, that Benito Floro should be running all levels of the game, and from what I understand, and I didn't get this directly from Floro or his people, but from what I understand is that his preference would be to have a different technical director in there, a technical director that is more in line with his beliefs and development strategies.
Let me draw a parallel to you, Duane, and you'll be able to tell me if it's a good parallel or not. If you remember a couple years ago, the Olympic team for the United States that was supposed to go to London, but eventually did not qualify, the U23 team, they were really touted as one of the best of their generation, but eventually didn't realize any of their potential. The situation for me, even though it's a country that it's in a way different state of soccer than we are, I think there's a parallel to be drawn there, and look at what they did to remedy the situation.
Yeah, certainly. I think that we like to not look to the U.S. for solutions, but in many ways that they have figured things out in a way that we haven't. It's not to say the U.S. system is perfect, and certainly there are some issues there as well. But absolutely, we need to be looking. We need to be open-minded and need not to be arrogant about our own solutions, because I think that's what's got us into the problems in the past, is that we've relied on the same group of people that have a very set view of how they can fix things, even though it's like we talk about it all the time. The definition of insanity is to try the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, and that's kind of what happens in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely, you're
right. Just to go back to the connection, if you watch, and this is maybe a segue into the national team talk. The one thing that in talking to people today, that they talked also about the Iceland games, and they grain of salt with them because they were what they were. But what they liked about what they saw at that Iceland level was that the team was playing a very possession oriented. We're trying to make passes. We're trying to make plays. We're playing a style that was very progressive, very forward thinking in a lot of ways. They weren't trying to do the old Route One thing. They weren't trying to bypass the midfield to get the ball up to a streaking forward or something like in the past you might have seen a Canadian team. And they suggested that the tactical difference between what was happening at the U20 group and what was happening at the national team level was glaring and was startling to them, and that they really wished they would have seen the U20s be a little bit more given a chance to succeed a little bit more, and given a chance to sort of be a little bit more progressive with the ball and a little bit more technical in their play. And they felt that really was, obviously the coach has got to bear responsibility for that, but they also felt that was a bit of a directive, that they were, they felt that they had guys in Larne and Hamilton, which are talented, strong kids, that they could just sort of overwhelm oppositions and sort of out physicality them. And that didn't work out. Whereas you saw with the national team level, they tried to play with Iceland a little bit, the Iceland D team, but however, they tried to play with them. And that kind of disconnect is what we're talking about here. Yeah. And it speaks to, it's, the CSA, Kevin, it's not as bad as it was in the mid 2000s, like 2004, 2005, 2006. It isn't. there have been changes that have been made, and have been progressive changes that have been made. However, it's like you had a laptop and you watched a lot of online streaming from Russian websites, and it completely got destroyed by a virus. And you've taken it back to the store, and they've cleaned out 95% of that virus, but that 5% is still going to cause a problem, and it's still going to make your laptop not run perfectly and not run as well as a laptop that doesn't have any virus, right? And that's kind of where we're at right now. We got to get rid of that 5%, but that 5% is hard to find, and it's hard to get rid of.
Just to go back to one point you mentioned a little earlier about the recent change of style of play of Canada. They're playing a more high percentage pass, a high percentage play, the result of the play, which in the past we're trying long balls, like you were saying, trying to bypass midfielder, and that doesn't have a high percentage of being accomplished. And they have to be realistic and coherent with their skills set and execute the type of play that will enhance their strength and hide the weakness of the team. And it's something for me that's mind-blowing that we didn't do earlier, Duane.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's mind-blowing. A lot of things we didn't do earlier in this country when it comes to it. And, I've said this many times that we're paying for the sins of 2000, late 90s right now. I mean, we went into a very deep hole, and it's going to take a long time to climb out. I do take some positives by the fact that there are, as I said a minute ago, some potential in that group. But from a national team success level, I think that what we're seeing in the last couple of weeks is that we're at least a cycle away. And that's hard from a fan perspective, but you really have to, I think, focus on the process. If you are a fan, if you do truly care about the sport and want to see it to grow, you can't get caught down in the glory, I guess. I don't think anyone that's a Canadian fan is going to ever be accused of being a glory hunter, but...
Yeah, we might qualify for the second round of qualification. Woohoo!
Exactly. Yeah, I tell you, we're going to earn it when we get there. But look, people are. I will defend the CSA when people attack them blindly and just say, sack the CSA. We got to blow it all up again. That's just not. It lacks a certain nuance. But there certainly are issues. And again, I point to the technical director position and ask whether he is the most qualified guy to be running this program right now, and whether we shouldn't just be handing the reins to Floro. Make a universal program from top to bottom. Floro's made some strange decisions in terms of relying on the older guys right now, but I think that maybe that might be a reflection of the talent level more than anything else. That the reason he's bringing up unattached FC is because he doesn't want to completely destroy the confidence of the younger group by having them destroyed every game.
He might be having his reputation destroyed by having a team lose, even though they're in a rebuilding process too. Yeah,
I don't know if Floro cares about his reputation at this point. He came to Canada, but
his boss might, though.
Yeah, look, the first year under Floro, they were getting killed, and it wasn't pretty, and they did need to bring some of those older guys back in. And we saw a player like Ian Hume will be a player, like even though he's older, as long as he keeps playing, will be a player in this cycle. So you might as well get him back in the program. Like Di Rosario is another question altogether. However, there's some talk today that Houston might have some interest in MLS for him, so that's hope for Canadian cycle that he does. But certainly he's going to be done after the Gold Cup. You can criticize him to a point, but I come back to this balanced idea. He gave lots of kids a chance in that game. He brought a guy like Nana Adekora back out and gave him 2 games out there, even though he looked horrific at times. Nana did not look good.
Nana.
Yeah, sad story that. Nice guy Nana is too, so it is a sad story. But you do need to maintain some level of competitiveness, and I think that those older guys, for better or worse, still have more talent than most players out there, and they're going to need to be filled in there until a better time comes around. But in terms of the style of play and the confidence that he's building and how to build that style of play, they aren't reverting back out to the boot and chase of the old. They aren't panicking at the national team level, at the senior national team level. That's why that Colombia game was so refreshing to me. It wasn't that it was exciting to watch them bunker for 90 minutes. It was that they didn't panic during the 90 minutes, even though there was wasn't hostile, but there was a big crowd cheering against them and so on and so forth. It's just small battles, and we've got to focus on those small battles. And, getting a draw against Iceland it was a decent game, and we just move on and we take it from there, I think. But the U20s, oh, it's again, there's problems. We've touched on it. At this point in time, we just got to hope that those USL Pro teams start to offer these kids a chance to maintain their career into their early 20s, so that we can make them professionals, and then we won't care whether we're playing in youth tournaments, because the big countries don't care if they play in the youth tournaments. They only care if they're producing players.
Last thought before we move on, Duane. Did we get our hopes high too quickly for that group of players? Did we hype it up a little too much, that tournament?
Yes and no. I think that there was legitimate excitement over the tour in the fall, where they got the good results, and there was a suggestion that there was a lot of talent, at least in the starting 11 with this group, that should have been celebrated. And I think that I would rather see Canadian soccer fans get too excited for a group right now than to be negative and constantly dwelling in the failures of the past. I mean, this is a program that 8-1 is still very fresh. It's still a fresh wound in a lot of ways, and for the community, such as it is, to get behind and to start to just get back into the day-to-day process of supporting this team and trying to see it grow, I think is something that needs to happen, and needs to happen for the overall health of their mental health and for the health of the program in terms of its support moving forward. Did we oversell their potential? Clearly, based on the result, we did, but I just don't know whether it wasn't just Canadians that were saying that this was a good group. There were, if you listen to some of the American coverage, some of the people that cover prospect sort of players, that type of thing, they saw talent in this group too. So it certainly was something that was a disappointment, and I think it's good that we're disappointed, because as long as that disappointment and that frustration leads to people critically evaluating what happened and making necessary changes. This will be the most interesting test of the new CSA, is what they do with this. If it's just business as usual moving forward, then I think that we need to start beating the drum for what the hell, guys, what are you doing? But if they make some changes, then we need to think that not that, again, as Rudi said, we don't want to wish people lose their jobs, but in this industry, in this field, accountability in terms of the scoreboard is the ultimate thing.
It is.
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll wrap some MLS news up.
And yes, the wait is finally over. Teespring.com/Two Solitudes podcast. You can get the official unattached FC shirt. Yes, you can finally represent the most consistent feeder club of the Canadian men's national team history. You can finally walk around the street and be able to walk around with pride with one of the most famous club in Canadian history. Yes, the wait is over. Teespring.com/Two Solitudes podcast. $25 well invested in the future of Canadian broadcasting in the world of soccer. While supplies last. Shipping not included.
And we're back, and gonna wrap the MLS news up here. We've talked a lot about Toronto in the recent days, so I'll get this quickly off the top. Damian Parquet, I think that's how you say it anyway. Parquet is the Polish international defender of French descent, which is a mouthful, that has been linked for TFC for several weeks now. The hang up there was always that there was maybe a transfer fee that would be required. Just yesterday, very quietly, it sort of slipped under the radar when the Giovinco news was breaking. He actually terminated his contract in Spain, so he is now available and are free. I think everyone agrees that Toronto FC needs to address the backline next. That was the question I asked Bezbatchenko in the press conference, which you can hear on yesterday's special edition, and they sort of agreed as well. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll evaluate that more as if it happens. But certainly, if Toronto doesn't address the backline problems, they may have to score 5 goals a game next year to win. Speaking of defenders, Kevin, the Impact have signed one. Why don't you tell me a bit about Mr. Simon?
As a DP on top of it, Laurent Simon, a Belgian defender. Let me just get this right so I'm not mistaken his age. He was born in 85, so he's 29 years old. Not too old, but maybe in his prime for a defender, you would say, as a center back. He's not the tallest of defenders, 5 foot 11 and a half, but tall enough to have an impact in Major League Soccer. His play is a physical play. He used to play his most recent club with Standard de Liège in the first division of Belgium League. Which is a great team. He played for Belgium in the World Cup last summer. So it's a great signing, and as a DP, we don't see that often in Major League Soccer. I am surprised that Montreal went that way, but sometimes you need to build from the back, and that guy might be the key.
Yeah, certainly. It's interesting that MLS is now allowing DPs at the back. They didn't for a while, as Toronto FC fans can tell you well and good. A guy that Simon, I assume he's a French Belgian, so he will be able to fit into the Montreal culture pretty well there. And I think that's important to consider, sort of how a player fits in your community, as we learned with Jermaine Defoe as well.
I'm glad they used that talent pool, because they never did before. Because Montreal is a place that would attract French-speaking players in Major League Soccer that the other team don't have. It's an asset that you have a French-speaking city, if you look at it that way, and I never really used that in the last 3 years that the club's been in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I don't take a cynical view of that at all. If the Impact went out and tried to build a very French team, I don't think anyone would blame them. It also works from a marketing level, too. I would suspect that Montrealers would embrace that, would they not?
I suppose so. Same for Hispanic players in LA or Miami. Some things are made to go together, and French-speaking players playing for Montreal compared to playing for Columbus, it's more attractive to a player if he's French-speaking.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. I mean,
for many reasons.
Even beyond that, the sort of the obvious, like, sort of surface stuff. Again, as I spoke to a minute ago, you want a player to fit in the community, and if you bring in, like, there are English-speaking Americans for the most part, there are Canadians for that matter, that are going to struggle in Montreal for language reasons. Although Montreal is pretty easy to get around to on English, but however,
if you get out of Montreal,
yeah, but. You think about it from effective too. If you have a spouse that wants to work, and they don't speak the language, then that's going to be difficult. There's lots of factors that fans don't necessarily think of. So
how about the Jabrovsky, Duane?
I will. Speaking of former Impact players, did you see Mr. Warner complaining about the special announcements in Canada the other day on Twitter? Not Warner, pardon me.
Nakajima Farhan?
No, Wagner.
Wagner.
He tweeted out, "Stop with the special announcement. We get it. You have unlimited funds." It was like dripping in bitterness and sarcasticness. It's hilarious. I don't know whether he was being anti-Toronto or anti-Canada, but he used the term north of the border. It got retweeted quite a bit yesterday, so you might want to check that one out.
I saw that. I saw that too. Another rumor concerning Montreal coming out yesterday, and that's all rumors, but it comes from a beat reporter of Coventry City Club out of the championship. Apparently, Simeon Jackson would like to end his career on his home soil, and apparently Montreal could be a potential destination. Apparently, we'll keep an eye on that as well, but a Canadian men's national team coming back home, that's interesting.
Yeah, Simeon would be. Would be very careful with him in an MLS context.
Not as a DP, not over my dead body.
Yeah, no, he's not a DP at all. There's no doubt about that. He is a guy that is quite slight, that has struggled in CONCACAF too. So I would be very I love him as a player, and I think his story is great, and it doesn't get told enough. It's essentially the Canadian version of Jay DeMeritt. He went over there and lived with family and worked his way up in the conference to play in the Premiership. So it is the exact same story, with the exception of the World Cup aspect of it. But that's not his fault.
There's no movie about him.
Yeah, there is no movie, but no one's spamming me on Twitter every 2 days about a movie. I've seen the movie. It's okay.
You're being generous with that. Okay,
it's okay.
He's retired now. You don't have to be nice.
Yeah. At any rate, but yeah, look, that's the thing that we when you bring Canadians back, and I've heard the Atiba Hutchinson rumor to Toronto, which I don't know whether that's just people connecting dots that aren't there or what the case is. And we certainly saw the Julian de Guzman situation back in the day. That Julian look, Julian had moments for TFC where you could see the quality there, but the amount of attention that went on him because he was a Canadian international that came back on the big money was something that he never overcame. So I would be you have to be very careful about that when you're bringing over the established Canadian players, that you're bringing them over for the right reasons and not just for the passport, which may sound contradictory to those that are screaming at their iPhones right now at me in Vancouver. I'm talking about the upper level guys, not the kids. When you're bringing in a name, a guy that's established himself in Europe, and you're paying him big bucks, they're going to have to perform. And Canadians are such that, Kevin, that they will chop the head off their own quicker than anything if it doesn't go right. Right? There's a lot of stupid Canadians. There was a lot of that with Julian. A lot of people that just dismissed him because they thought it was ridiculous that we signed a Canadian international, and clearly he was overrated. That was something that came up. So with Simeon, it's the size that would worry me the most.
Another player that was similar size and did worry players and actually is not part of an MLS club right now, Issei Nakajima. It all started on LinkedIn. Beginning of last week, picture of him appeared on LinkedIn with saying that he's just been released by the club, and that's the first I've heard of it. That's like 30 hours before the actual release of the club. So a second time I see that in the last month that a player posted on LinkedIn, then the club is forced to announce it after that he's been released by the club and he's actually looking for a club on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn. LinkedIn works?
Yes, I guess it's, in the ratings of social media, it's right between MySpace and Facebook. It's somewhere in between. But that space is big.
Yeah, I've never really found that it works that well, but at any rate,
I guess we're not in. So.
Yeah, we're not that linked for a footballer too. It seems a little odd. Did he post a YouTube video highlights of himself on there?
I guess with a good song behind it, like a Creed or like a Limp Bizkit song.
Creed. Oh dear.
No, wait, it's a Canadian. He's Canadian now. It has to be Nickelback.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Poor man's Nickelback. Poor man's Creed. Anyway, did he overprice himself? Is that what you think happened there?
No, but what I'm disappointed about that is not for Issei per se, is because Montreal traded Colin Warner and now for nothing. So a lot of trade this year by Montreal resulted with the team less than what they actually paid for at the end. And to me, it's still mind-blowing that happens year after year. Montreal, I guess I'm getting used to it, right? That's what you would say from Toronto to me. It's like aren't you used to it yet? I guess now.
It's you had a lot of success at the USL Pro level, so it's going to take you guys a little bit longer to get used to that side of things. Look, we broke it down at the time how we thought Warner the TFC probably won that trade.
We were the first ones to say that because at the beginning everybody was saying Montreal was winning that trade by far. And I was one of the only ones from Montreal saying that, guys, you were looking at Warner the wrong way because what he does, it's not flashy, but it's impactful at the long run. And look at today where we are.
It's an important MLS piece that every team needs. He's your backup central midfielder in a lot of ways, right? Your central defensive midfielder sort of there. He's a squad player for sure on a good team, but he's absolutely a player that's the right value and it's going to play for a while in MLS. So I like Issei too, but wide players are generally speaking in the MLS context, when you're looking at a salary cap, getting wide quick guys is more your 18 to 22-year-olds, your younger guys that you break in because there's less sort of defensive responsibility out wide. There's more chance for athleticism to rule the day, and you can take more of a risk. And I think the younger guys, it's just generally how most MLS teams think, is they would rather break a younger guy in out there than to use it on an older player.
More than that, Duane, I think the winger spot in MLS in almost every 20 team included in the league now is not a spot that is worthy, or nobody has the value enough in that position to be like cemented in that position. Usually there are people that you move around and you fill that position with some of the roster that you have left after you spent your money at other places. With a salary cap in the league, you can probably not afford to have a big piece and a place that it's not as influential. It doesn't have the same influential on the game as another position as a central midfielder or as a forward would have compared to a winger.
You talk about building the spine. That's
Yeah.
a phrase you hear all the time, and it's universal, and it's accepted that way because it's reality that you can afford to be a little more risque on the outside because athleticism can overrule talent out there, technical talent on the wide parts of the field. Now, I think that the one counter to that, and we're getting a little off topic here, is the fullbacks, and I think you're going to start to see a greater push for more overlapping, athletic, attack-minded forwards or fullbacks in MLS. You don't necessarily see them a great deal in the league right now, and that's kind of the next evolution of the game in North America. But those players are tough to find, and I don't know whether we're ready to pay the type of salary. I don't think Pablo Zabaleta is on his way to MLS anytime soon, right? Like those type of guys are tough to find that can play that sort of amazing overlapping.
And as soon as there's one, somebody picks him away. Look at Yedlin. He was the first one we had in years that was in that position and had an offensive flair, and he's already with Tottenham. So
Fair enough, and we'll see how that goes. Briefly, I think we'll wrap up into this and talk about Carl Robinson a little bit, but I did want to mention Daniel Henry real quickly, just as an update. He did actually play 65 minutes of a West Ham development game the other day. For what it's worth, the West Ham play-by-play, minute-by-minute did have high praise for his 65 minutes of play when he came off, said that he looked good in distribution and tracking, and they thought that it was a good debut for the young Canadian who tries to get his game legs in there, and hopefully he'll see some action somewhere soon. So that's a little Daniel Henry update for you there. Hope Izzy finds a contract. I don't know whether the NASL might be a place for him or what, but that's hope he. We hope all.
There's 3 new teams in Canada next year. Well, this year, next couple months, there
Yes,
might be opportunities there. Who knows?
All right. Let's talk about the West Coast now and Carl Robinson's extension.
Yes.
Look, I think we all agree that Carl Robinson did a decent job with the Whitecaps last year. If we looked back to what we were talking about, this podcast didn't exist a year ago at this time, but if had it existed, we would have been talking about how the Whitecaps had to replace Camilo, and maybe they were going to take a step back, and they were probably sort of maybe in the 7-8 kind of range in the West, and he managed to get them up into 5th place, which is, of course, that mythical playoff spot. So he has been rewarded with an extension there.
They needed stability. I think that's the whole reason for the extension. Yes, he did a good job. He did maybe bring the team to a higher level than was expected of him, but stability was a big factor in re-signing him, I think, too, because in MLS, it's a point that we keep repeating all the time here on Two Solitudes, but stability is really important going forward. And even if it's not the best coach, same for Montreal here, sometimes stability can be more important and eventually overcome the lack of skills as a coach.
Yeah, and look, I think that Robinson's greatest strength is his ability to relate to the players and to be a player's coach. Now, that can have downfalls occasionally if you're too much of a player's coach, but if things go bad, then can you crap the whip? I think that there is some evidence that he can. Certainly, he was a very tough-nosed player that was always a leader on the pitch when he played. We saw that firsthand here in Toronto, and anyone who followed his career before that knows that as well. He's a highly respected guy with lots of contacts, especially in the UK, and I think that plays a big role in that too. That his ability to sort of to work the contacts, and to get players in, because ultimately that's the other half of a manager's job. It's not all about the tactics. It's a lot about being able to attract players, and certainly the Whitecaps have a philosophy and the type of player they want in, and Carl Robinson seems to be able to find those players and to work with them. And we applaud the move. He is a guy that's almost seems Canadian. He's been here so long now. I know he stopped in New York for a while, but I think everyone kind of likes Carl Robinson in the Canadian circle, and we're glad to keep him around. Maybe one day he might be able to play an active role in the Canadian system too. We can hope on that angle maybe.
Sure, but don't forget where he's actually is right now, right? He's in Vancouver, so you can't ask for too much on that side.
I made a pledge to someone that I wasn't going to talk about the Vancouver Whitecaps.
I did it. You did it. I did.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm going to take a break on that for a little while and let it play out. Look, I mean, in terms of what it means, just a contract extension for a coach doesn't necessarily mean he's going to stay there for the whole contract, but it is stability for Robinson. It is a vote of confidence by the team. When you consider the way he was hired last year, it certainly is a reflection of the job he did, and I think that it's got to be viewed as a positive move in that regard. He's going to have some challenges next year. I think that people will accuse me of being biased, but when you add the CCL play into it and have they improved enough? Have they really addressed some of their shortcomings? We'll see. I think that the Whitecaps are going to. It's going to be a harder struggle for them to match what they did last year. I think they caught a few people off guard, and I think Portland had a bit of a down year as well. So we'll see whether he gets the same level of commitment and same level of sort of support if they do struggle this year and maybe finish. Well, there's an extra spot in the playoffs, so maybe that'll help them. But we'll see whether that level of support stays. But all in all, Carl Robinson's a good guy. Everyone agrees with that. Good for him.
But I think Vancouver is going to realize what me and you and us and everybody in Toronto, Montreal knew for a long time, that the CCL and the calendar and MLS together, they don't mesh that well.
Not unless there's a significant increase in payroll, which allows you to get the depth to compete with the Mexican teams. It's going to be tough.
And spots. You need more spots, international spots too as well. It's not just the payroll. The CBA is going to be talked about soon, so it's interesting to see if that whole thing changes with the CCL, because MLS keeps saying that CCL is important to them too. So,
yeah, well, they say that.
I know they just say it.
Speaking of which, you seen the Impact's marketing push for the CCL game? It's pretty slick. I gotta give them that.
I have to say yes. It's a 222, a company out of Montreal that made the site #Marquons l'Histoire, or Mark History, if I'm not mistaken.
Make history, I believe.
Make history in the English version. Just go. It's a new trend. They call microsite. It's a site that doesn't have a lot of it, but it's really impressive. It's a couple videos, a song, a lot of impressive graphics with the history of the CONCACAF and the whole pathway to where they are today. It's very impressive.
It is very impressive, as I said. I won't even point out that you won't make history if you make the semifinals of the CCL. That would be really petty of me to point that out, so I won't do that.
Well, it depends how you qualify history. It would be Montreal Impact history.
True. Wouldn't be Canadian history, though. Nope. There has been another team in Canada. I forget who that was, or whether they beat Beckham or not.
No, you don't forget it. You remember. Stop lying to me.
Do you think that game will sell out?
They need to. I think with that website, but they need to pump it up a little more. But it's hard now. It's going to sound cliche again, but the Canadians are really good in hockey right now. And that takes a lot of space in a newspaper. Takes a lot of space in the 30-minute sports news wrap-up. So they need to buy. It's going to sell out. They're going to need to invest a lot on publicity, a lot on marketing, and I mean direct marketing, like TV ads and billboards on highways.
And look, I mean, they filled the building up in 09, and full credit to them for doing that. But everyone knows that the tickets were very inexpensive, which was the right thing to do. I'm not blaming them for that, but I don't think that they can necessarily repeat the same price point that they did back then. So to expect another 55,000 in there might be asking a bit much. But it was a lot of.
Go close to 35, 40, Duane, I would consider that a success.
Yeah, I was going to say the Kansas City Dome game here in Toronto was 35,000, and that was still a lot of fun, and it still felt like a big thing. So, hopefully that. I'm actually looking to come down for that game, so for fair warning there, Montreal folk. Let's take a break, Kevin. We'll come back, and we're going to break down a little bit of USL Pro news before we get out of here for at least a day.
Thanks for listening to the Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast on Stitcher Radio with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie. Subscribe to the show on Stitcher Radio. Listen to the show on Stitcher Radio. Stitcher Radio, Stitcher Radio. Would you just please subscribe to the show on Stitcher Radio? Thank you very much for subscribing to the show. And now, back to the show on Stitcher Radio. Coming soon on Stitcher Radio.
And we're back. We're going to keep this one tight because we've been long today, I know, although you'd love to listen to us talk, and I love to talk for you, but we will keep it tight. USL Pro stadium announcement is coming up tomorrow in Toronto for Toronto. They're going to make an announcement, which I reported way back when on CSN before it then sort of looked like it might shift somewhere else, and then it shifted back, that it's going to be in Vaughan at the Ontario Soccer Centre. They're going to build a little 3,000 to 5,000 seat stadium up there, which is going to be a nice little centerpiece in an area of the city that has a lot of support for the game. It will be I don't know where they're going to start the season next year. I suspect they might play at Downsview until the stadium's built, or maybe just move around a little bit. It's going to be a bit of a challenge. That was the holdup. You know, this just speaks to the commitment, I think, anyway. And look, people accuse me of being TFC biased here, but I think it does speak to the commitment that they have made to trying to do the academy side right. And all three Canadian teams have, in fact, invested in the academy and are invested in USL Pro. And I
And a lot of money. All three
think that
teams
when
are
you look at
investing millions, Dwayne. Sorry, you cut out there.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look at, and not all the American teams, I shouldn't make this universal, but there are a lot of them that aren't going USL Pro off the start, that are still not going into the full teams, and you know, there's a lot of reasons that we've talked about a lot in the past. I think there is a greater need for the Canadian teams to produce their own talent for a lot of different reasons, not just national team reasons, but also for success on MLS level reasons. They need to produce domestic so that they don't over rely on international spots. And this is just one more step along that way. It'll be good, I think, to. I'm glad that it's not in Waterloo. That was the one suggestion, that it would be in Waterloo. The TFC2 would be in Waterloo. I'm happy from a personal level that I don't have to figure my way out to Waterloo, although I went to school there. It's a nice little town, but I don't know if I want to take the bus up there.
Yeah, it'll take you about 5 hours every time you go back and forth.
Yeah, well, yeah, I might get stuck at Phil's. Phil's is a famous little student bar that I'd be a complete grandfather in if I went into now. But at any rate, you know, what kind of expectation will they have up there for crowds and all that? I think that maybe if you're looking at 300 to 500, maybe 1,000 people per game, you'd be successful on the pitch. I don't think that's necessarily TFC's goal. The stadium is really close to Downsview. It's really close to the training center.
Did they announce ticket prices or how they would go with ticket sales? Compared to, I don't want to compare it to the Montreal, but Montreal already announced that the admission will be free for those games. Will be so in a way to not put pressure on the result of the team. How do you think Toronto is going to go in a different market than their first team? Because FC Montreal is going to be in Montreal.
Hopefully, we find out tomorrow on that stuff. I had heard before that what the thinking was that there would be some kind of either free or deeply discounted rate for season ticket holders. I suspect that what I've heard suggested to me is if you're a TFC senior team season ticket holder, that you'd have a card or something that you could just flash to get in. And that they would also offer it free to Ontario, those involved in the Ontario soccer community. That's one of the reasons they partnered in Vaughan. You know, some people may be cynical and think it's because it has an Italian population up there, which it does. It's in Woodbridge, actually.
That's why they signed Giovinco.
Yeah, exactly. But it's more about trying to increase the partnerships at the OSA level and with the clubs and local clubs. And there was some suggestion that the OSA would be involved in the day-to-day operations in terms of game day and stuff like that, and that they would offer free admission to carded players within the Ontario system. So that's something that we'll find out tomorrow. I don't think that you're going to see a very big charge to get into those games, if much of anything. The USL Pro may require that there be some cost, although they're not in Montreal. There wasn't in LA last year, but I just don't think that even though MLSE is so notorious for that sort of stuff, that if you look at what they did at the academy level last year in in League One, they didn't charge to get into those games. So I expect that it'll be very economical if there is any charge at all.
Let's hope for just the crowd's sakes.
Yeah. All right. I don't think there's much more to say on that. I just want to get it into the podcast because I think it is an important piece of news. It's a nice little stadium that'll get built that I think that will be useful to the Ontario soccer community as well. I will be at that press conference tomorrow. I will get some sound from it, and I'm sure that Kevin will be happy to crunch it and put it into a podcast form for you all to listen to after the fact. But exciting news on a lot of fronts, even though the U20s sort of disappointed us all this week.
And as we speak, starting in about an hour and a half, the Super Draft Part 2, so the first annual USL Pro Draft, Wayne.
Pretty much, yep.
We'll follow that. Listen to our Super Draft Live show that we did last Thursday live on YouTube. You can listen to it on YouTube and listen to yesterday's show. It's a Giovinco to TO press conference, and you can listen to Duane talking to Bezpachenko, talking to Greg Vanning, and talking to, Giovinco was talking, so exactly. And until later this week to talk about the USL Pro news in Toronto and the Super Draft, have a great soccer.